So I'm an introvert plus I'm shy, which is like two strikes against me sometimes.
No, not strikes against you. Two facets of your personality.
Welcome, everyone, to Breaking Bread, the podcast brought to you by Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services. Excellent to have you along. I'm glad to have in this studio here today a couple of special guests. I've got Ron Messner and Kristen Schwind. Welcome, both of you. Great to have you here.
Thanks.
Ron needs very little introduction. Kristen, you're a new voice.
Yeah, I have been at ACCFS for about a year and a half. It'll be 2 years in October. And I work at the front desk, and I am Ted's personal assistant. So whatever he needs done, I try and do. And anything else the counselors or anybody else needs, I try and do that as well.
Okay. Thank you both for being here. Our topic today is introversion as it intersects the church. This matter of personality has a lot to do with how we interact with church and view church. I think we could probably say introversion and extroversion is all on a spectrum. None of us perhaps are classically one way or the other, and we all have tendencies. But I think between the three of us, we can provide some sort of voice to this experience. To what end? Well, to the end that we might all live wisely with one another. Does that foundation make sense to you?
Yes, I do think it's a good thing to speak into. Anytime you choose to define people using a dichotomy, you immediately run into trouble. And we'll probably speak to that during this podcast, that somebody's not just an introvert or just an extrovert. It's important to know what that means. If there was some way to describe people by their actual personality, not just by a term, it would probably be more useful. But I think it will be good to talk about how do we interact at church and what value do we have, even what church is, will be good to talk about.
I'd like to see two different goals. Actually, I think one goal from this conversation would be to help extroverts understand what an introvert might be experiencing in the church experience and fellowship. And also, I would like, two-pronged, a goal also for introverts to see, this is how I should be living and how I could live in the church reality in a healthy way as well. So maybe two-pronged there. But Kristen, I'd be glad to hear just even how this setup strikes you. Is there anything that says, I can relate to that, or any sanction that you can provide there?
Like we had baptisms at our church this past Sunday, and there were so many people there, and I just was up against the wall, just people watching, just trying not to get too involved because it would stress me out. But I do think that if church wasn't extroverted, then there would be no interaction with people whatsoever. So you have to have a balance of both introverts and extroverts.
So we do have a tension, and I appreciate you acknowledging that. There's a tension here because church is classically communal. I mean, what is church if it's not together? That's going to pose perhaps a difficult reality for some.
I want to push back a little bit, Matt. I was thinking about it this morning. We're describing church as what happens Sunday between 9:30 and 2. And actually, that's just one piece of church. That's the worship part of church. And I think we would all agree, and I think it gives some context for introverts, if we describe church as the body and all the functions of the body. And I would say this about Washington Church, but I'm sure it's true in each of yours. I'm constantly reminded and surprised at things that are happening on a much smaller scale. And that the introverts fit into very nicely. But we have a tendency to describe or to think of church. So when you say communal, church worship is communal. But the church function is not necessarily. It's made up of many smaller interactions. And I think it's helpful for those of us who tend to be more introverted and think of it in the bigger context of all that occurs. Our favorite place might not be the Sunday worship service or the Wednesday worship service. It might be in those other places.
I love that pushback. And I think that's a very important nuance to speak to, right? That yes, we're talking about churches as an expansive reality that far extends the time together. And I appreciate you putting voice, even that to Ron, to maybe our favorite time is not that time. I'm not sure we ever hear that voiced, Ron. What you just voiced there, I think a great deal of people would feel bad if they had those thoughts, and we all do. You see what I'm saying?
It's because that's what we see. That's not a criticism of any of us thinking that way, because we all react from our senses and visually and in other ways. What we see is church in that communal sense.
Yeah.
But from a church leadership place and thinking of what the needs are and where they are met, that's really just a subset of church. That subset is communal.
Kristen, does that resonate with you, how Ron described maybe my favorite time of the week is not this time?
I think so. There are many different roles in the church and many different communities within the church and groups and committees and things that help the church run as a community.
I really appreciate that. We tend to associate leadership and extroversion. People assume because you manage crowds that you're extroverted. A lot of elders go home exhausted, and that's a definition of introversion.
And let's spell that out, because we haven't even yet, Ron. Why don't you say a little bit about how we would address introversion, extroversion?
Well, I think there's different ways to define it, but I think a really simple way is not how much you like going to an event or don't, or how much you like people or you don't, but the impact that it has on you. And those of us who tend to be more introverted, some of us really like events or groups, but we go home tired. And the extroverts that I know are like, well, could we have a lunch call too? Or is there something else? They're not tired yet because they've been pumped up with the interaction as opposed to worn down by it. And not worn down in a bad way, but more just, I've used up all that I have and I need a break.
Yeah. And they thrive off the interaction and are recharged by the interaction. An extrovert is equally to the introvert who is recharged by maybe some solitude.
I actually think that's a better definition than sometimes we think of introvert as socially avoidant, and that might be true, but that's not always true. That's a different definition. I think this definition of those who get charged up and thrive on crowds and those who enjoy that, have a lot to offer, but we're used up and we don't have more to give.
Kristen, do you ever feel like perhaps because of that personality that you have that you might be judged differently based on the choices you make on what you attend and don't attend?
Definitely. Sometimes I feel like I come off as aloof because I tend to be apart from a group, or I'm not quite sure how to insert myself into a group because I will tend to run the conversation through my mind to see if it's even worth putting the energy into it. And I'm like, no, it's all right. I'll just hang back.
I couldn't help but chuckle a little bit when you said people might find you aloof. As I have this distinct memory of, I probably was 14 or 15 on the bus, and this girl we were friends, she just said, you can be so conceited. And I thought, conceited? I'm more working on self-esteem and on the other side of that. And it wasn't till later, maybe years later, I realized I wasn't interacting. And people interpret that as not caring, or that we think we were better than, or that they're not worth engaging with. And we're sitting there trying to figure out, what would I say if I did? Or would they even want me to? As opposed to avoiding because we think that we're better or different. So I think introverts can be very easily misunderstood, misinterpreted.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Yes, that resonates for sure.
What would your reaction be to, some have claimed that the church tends to emphasize extroversion, reward extroversion. What would you say to that prompt? True, false? In what ways is it true?
I think it goes back to where we started. I think that's true when we're talking about communal events. Some people define extroversion, or particularly the ability to step in and visit, the desire to visit, almost as a moral quality or a Christian quality, like that shows that somebody cares or that they want to engage with others, when in fact what they're observing is somebody's personality, that desire to step into. And I think it's true, those of us who are more introverted can be a bit of a weight on a conversation or socializing because we're not always participating, or we don't participate as easily. But it's not a moral quality. It's not a Christian quality. It's a part of our personality and where we have the energy or enter into comfortably in terms of interactions. We're still good people, in other words.
No, that's good.
I'm just curious, Kristen, if you mentioned about being seen as aloof, whether you've actually faced a situation where you sensed that people were questioning you or disapproving or unsure of your motives. because of your introversion?
I don't know if I've ever been in a certain situation like that, but I tend to judge myself more as that way as well, as just being more unsure of myself. So I'm an introvert, plus I'm shy, which is like two strikes against me sometimes.
No, not strikes against you. Two facets of your personality.
Yeah.
Well, I want to comment. I think it's fair, Kristen. It does sometimes make it difficult. The more introverted we are, it isn't just what others think. It means more work or questioning our own, whether we're not motivated to be engaged with people or don't care about them as much.
Yeah.
I'm really fascinated at the construct of church and how we lay. Now, I'm going to talk about that, those hours that you have very well, you've raised that point very well. But we would say those hours on Sunday and Wednesday nights and other events are important. They do have fellowship very, very central in them. And I'm just kind of curious, and now I'm just kind of pontificating. I'm kind of curious what the church would have looked like over the ages and what those times together would look like. Have we gravitated towards a more dynamic interaction required and emphasis than I'm thinking of a person slipping into a cathedral and worshiping God, meeting God there, in and among the family of God? Those hours were important hours in their weekly real estate, but it had less to do with being chatty and more to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know if this is accurate or not. Sometimes I notice how churches are built, specifically apostolic Christian churches. And if you go back 70 to 80 years, they didn't have a fellowship area. They had a coat area and enough room for a fourth or less of the church to stand. And then as times change, so currently churches, they really emphasize a large fellowship area. And it makes me wonder if we've changed and use the Sunday worship time particularly, maybe Wednesday night also, more for fellowship than we used to. If it used to be more a time of worship, so the assembly was larger, the fellowship area is smaller. I don't know if this is true, but I can't imagine, they couldn't have fellowshipped as much. There was not a place to do it. And I'm sure that they didn't approve of that happening in the assembly, so people had to have come, hung up their coat, and gone in and sat down. Mm-hmm. Did fellowship happen a different place other than during church? Is that a part of the kind of charismatic nature that church has developed into?
And the last thing I would want to do is really to deposit this idea that we need to do less fellowship, right? Because I think we all agree right here that fellowship is critical, and that is a huge function of the church.
We have a desire for brotherhood, for engaging in a church. We see the body having value for us and being able to give to it. It's not that. It's that it takes more effort and discipline to engage. But it's not a discounting of the value of that. Mm-hmm. So it is who we are. It is a personality issue.
Yeah. But I'm interested, Kristen, about what your worship looks like, your Sunday worship, because some do go to church excited to meet, greet, fellowship, and those types of things, as well as worship. I don't mean to say that, but I would have to imagine that we have something to learn from how the introvert slips into church, what their experience is, what they're excited about.
I enjoy the singing. We have more singing that we do. So I enjoy that aspect of it, is being in there and singing and then listening. And
I want to capture the beauty of singing. What a beautiful communal event. It's much better than singing by yourself at home, right? When we sing with people, I think there's something really, really powerful in participation in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think a key piece, at least for myself, I don't know if this is true. I think it is, though, of most introverts. We want to know what's expected of us. So during singing, it's find your part, do it, blend in. So we know what we're doing. Mm-hmm. During the worship service, regardless of how attentive we are, we know that it's, open the Bible, follow along, listen, try to understand that when we talk about church seeming to be more extroverted, we're talking about the fellowship time, a distinct subset of what church is, not only of the body, but even of the Sunday or Wednesday worship time. Introverts are not afraid of assignments. We're not afraid to sit on committees. We're not afraid to lead the committees. We're not afraid afraid's maybe not the right word, but intimidated by meeting one-on-one, serving as a mentor, being involved in discipleship. It's the fellowship time, which many of us still enjoy. I want to be really clear on that. We vary a lot in how much, but it does tire us because it's a lot of work figuring it out. Mm-hmm. It doesn't come natural to us. Mm-hmm. So definition, if you think about how to support or how to value introverts in your church, think of those defined roles. Use them, whether it's mentoring or something like that. Those of us who are introverted, at least for a certain part of the church, have as much and maybe more to offer because we can let the other person talk, pay attention to what we don't need to engage in it as much. There's not just a place. I think there's a value that we need to look for and recognize.
I would like you to speak to weaknesses. Introversion at its worst could be this. And then we also want the flip side of the coin. How is God beautifully using the gifts of the introvert in the church?
I think one of the things to look for is when an introvert is in church and hangs back every Sunday or every Wednesday night and is not interacting at all. They may feel like they don't fit in the church, and that is not true. They have a role to play.
What does that approach look like? I'm sure it's varied. It's got lots of nuances, depends on the person, but help us with a mindset to draw that person in or meet that person's needs.
Sure. Depending on how it is definitely dependent on the person, age difference. If you're around the same age, it's a little bit easier to go up to them and just kind of, hey, how's it going? And kind of get a little conversation started with them. It may not last very long, but they will feel like they have been noticed. And that will mean the world to them, that someone at church has noticed them instead of them just being at the back and not sure what to do with themselves.
Okay, and here's what I really love about that, Kristen, because I do think there's a lot of shades of uniqueness to people. What's the right thing to say probably depends on the person. But that concept of notice is probably universal. That's probably the message that's going to be helpful in that moment. And that could be done through a lot of different methods, but notice, I think, is a handle that we can take.
I think drawing somebody in means asking their opinion, what they're doing, how life's going, what they're interested in. That's a good skill with anyone, not just with an introvert. Mm-hmm. But it's helpful to somebody who can tend a little more towards social isolation if you define the conversation on things that they know what to say about.
That's helpful. Yeah, that's very helpful.
I think sometimes, though, it can be a little off-putting if the person coming up to them asks them super deep questions and they don't know them very well. They're not going to get a very good answer because introverts, myself, I am not comfortable. I may not know them. I'm not comfortable telling them those things. I am going to avoid that answer and talk about something else because I don't want to go there. So I think that's something else to kind of be
So here's a
aware
question, and again, lots of shades, I'm sure, to this, but as a rule of thumb, do introverts prefer deep conversations than shallow conversations? So that's the first toggle. And then with people that they have equity with or without. Do you see this matrix?
I don't think extrovert-introvert lines up with deep or shallow, but I appreciate Kristen's point of don't ask us to be deep if it's not a comfortable relationship. And I don't think it has as much to do with equity as you making it personalities that click. I think I would focus more on a sense of trust. So if it feels safe because I know it's not going to go someplace else or you're going to respect it or honor it, or I know you're genuinely interested, then it's not difficult to get a little bit deeper. But you have to make it safe. Let me know you care. So I don't think...
So there's a realness to it.
Yes.
I think,
if you want to go
an
deeper,
introvert wants real?
Oh, I would definitely say that's true. Yeah.
I think that's helpful.
You asked a question, Matt, and I want to tuck it in there. This is coming from the kind of the counseling side and perhaps some of what Ted sees. So when you ask, what's the downside of introversion? Depending on how strongly introverted somebody is, people can become socially isolated and do. And we see that happen. There are people who are loners and not always by choice. They need more interaction, but can't find a safe place to do it. So as introverts, we need to work against that. Introverts need to be careful to discipline themselves to engage. It can be, depending where we are in life and how strong that is, too easy to stay home or avoid the group or feel isolated from the church body, and that the church body does have something to offer. It is an important part. So we have work to do also.
Let's go to that beautiful space of God and His wisdom has knit us all wonderfully, and it's not a mistake necessarily that we have tendencies towards introversion and tendencies towards extroversion. Where do you see God using introversion really beautifully in the church? And we're going to expand that not only in those hours that we talked about, but beyond.
I would say in the one-on-one experiences, mentor, mentee, or even just a small group of friends or Bible study. I have a group that I'm doing a Bible study with, and I really enjoy that because I'm able to have those deeper conversations with them and be in that safe place. And then with the mentor-mentee relationship, you can get to know somebody really well and have that trust there and have those deep conversations with them as well and just be comfortable with that.
And that's such a critical part of church, right? That people, and you can kind of see God's mind even in this, in the gifting, right? You are not going to be the welcomer at the door, but we need welcomers at the door, right? Who just sees a visitor, who sees a person who's able to strike up a conversation with no equity at all, right? That extroverted person can do that and bring that person in. But then for that person to be able to find a deep well of relationships that will go the distance, extroverts do that as well, but introverts do that very well.
As I think about who I've referred people to, if there's somebody who needs some support or accountability or just some walking side by side, I probably tend to refer them more, not to extreme introverts, but to people who are a bit more introverted because I know they will listen well and contemplate with them and that the person won't be intimidated by them. It'll feel safe. So certainly that, but I think also in just other kinds of one-on-one tasks, things that just need to be done about the church. Introverts like definition. So if you give them a committee or a task, and I don't mean just like cleaning the bathrooms or vacuuming the carpet or whatever. An example might be reviewing Sunday school curriculum. It's something they can sit down and do and think through and think how that hits others. So a wide range of tasks. They won't get frustrated with the lack of interaction that's going on. The task will be fulfilling of itself. And not needing
But there's
the other.
some social clarity is what I'm hearing. For the social context, whether it's a committee, whether it's a team you're working on, there's a clarity brought to that social setting. And it sounds to me when there's not clarity, it's all free-for-all. Those social settings can induce anxiety. Is that fair?
Kristen mentioned about being in a Bible study. It makes me just curious. I suspect that introverts would do well in a Bible study that's really focused on understanding, on study, because we know what the topic is, what we're going to be talking about, can bring some thoughts with that. But there's a book or some kind of a format, specific questions, and I think most of them would be glad to share their perspective on what that is, but it's in a defined context.
There's social clarity. There's social clarity as well as a method by which to get deep, to be meaningful. And usually in that context, you have some order on how people talk and listen, and those roles are made very clear. I've really been blessed by that. I think that's really, really been helpful. Now, I hear you say, listening is a real likelihood to be a strength there. Not only listening to people, but listening, I would have to believe, to God. And I wonder if the introvert has some to share and offer the church in this ability to be silent, to not have to run around, to not be afraid of being home on a Friday night, right? Or being able to have that space. And I think it can be easily judged as non-spiritual, right? Not being here and the doors are open, right? But yet recharging in those times. I don't know. Is there anything to speak to that?
Well, I'm interested in Kristen's take on that. I would be careful about implying that introverts, because of their willingness to be alone, have a deeper connection with God. So that's not necessarily true.
I would say that varies person to person.
I agree.
Those Friday nights that I spend by myself, I am most likely not just humming and reading the Bible. I am doing other things that just help me relax because I tend to get in my head a lot.
And I appreciate that humility, Kristen, and the authenticity that you're having here. But let's be clear, I think God finds a great deal of pleasure in us, even outside of reading the Bible and humming and singing, right?
Yeah.
I think he finds a great deal of pleasure in us finding pleasure in good, wholesome things that recharge us, which is very likely happening in many ways.
Do you know, I wonder, Matt, if maybe the difference or the issue is for the extroverted person, they need to discipline themselves to be alone so that they can connect with God. The introverted person has that time and needs to discipline themselves so that they use it for that purpose. Mm-hmm. I don't think one is necessarily more connected or it comes more easily, but the discipline that's needed is a different discipline.
I really appreciate, thanks both of you for just, I guess, providing voice and bringing up and having a conversation about this, because I think it's important, right?
So I think, Matt, one of the values of using this as a discussion is not just about introversion or extroversion, it is about difference. Mm-hmm. And in the broad sense, recognizing that people who are not like us don't contribute less and don't have less to offer in the church. And the Bible speaks clearly about gifts, and some of those gifts are about personality. They're not just about skill sets. Mm-hmm. We all have a tendency to feel people should be a little bit more like us because we understand that, and to not be as understanding of people of a different nature. So I think this topic lends itself to remind us, no matter what the difference is, whatever that continuum is on, that there's value in personalities which are different than ours. Mm.
And I think that's an excellent way to close. So thank you. Thanks, Ron. I know, Kristen, you've been just counting down the days to have your voice.
So that wasn't near as painful as you thought, right?
No.
Oh, I'm so glad. Your voice was so important on this podcast. And for our listeners, hopefully this stirred up some thoughts, stirred up some perspectives. Certainly we didn't overturn every stone, and a lot of things have been left unsaid, but it expands our minds again to, everybody that we worship with and God has called into our families, and now we can live with one another in a more winsome, wise way, healthy way, as we fellowship with one another according to the gifts and according to our personalities, to the glory of God. Thanks, each one.
Thank you.